What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday. That's what my son's bride screamed at me, right in front of everyone, at the wedding I paid for. The music stopped, people stared, and for a moment I almost walked away. But then I smiled and said, "I'm leaving, dear. But before I go, there's someone you should meet." And when she turned around, she froze. I know how it sounds. A mother crashing her own son's wedding. But things aren't always what they seem. You see, I wasn't there out of jealousy or pride. I was there because I'd learned the truth about the woman he was about to marry. And once you hear what I found out, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did. Stay with me, and if this story hits home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happened next. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, a retired literature teacher and a widow. I've lived in Savannah, Georgia, my whole life. People who know me would probably tell you I'm calm, polite, and a little old-fashioned. I've spent most of my life doing what's right, keeping peace, and putting my family first. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd make a scene, especially not at my son's wedding. But that afternoon proved that sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong to everyone else. It had been raining since morning, the kind of steady drizzle that turns everything gray and quiet. The wedding was at Ashford Manor, one of those old southern estates with white columns and gardens that seem to go on forever. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful, and I kept thinking how strange it felt to walk through a place I had paid for, but wasn't supposed to be in. I had paid for the venue, the flowers, the band, even the champagne that everyone was holding. Every detail had been approved and chosen with love for a girl I once believed was going to be my daughter. I entered the ballroom quietly, hoping not to cause a scene, though I already knew there was no quiet way to do what I was about to do. The string quartet was playing softly, guests were smiling, and my son stood at the front of the room, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. Then she saw me. Her expression changed instantly. The bride, Brianna Dalton, though that wasn't her real name, stared at me like I was something that had crawled in from the rain. Her voice broke through the music, sharp and angry. "What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday." The room fell silent. The musicians stopped playing. Every single guest turned toward me. I could feel hundreds of eyes waiting for me to be embarrassed or to apologize. My face burned, but I didn't move. I stood straight and held my purse with both hands. I smiled at her, and I remember thinking how calm my own voice sounded when I said, "Oh, I'm leaving, dear. But before I go, there's someone you should meet." The words had barely left my mouth when the doors at the back of the room opened. A man stepped forward, dressed in a dark suit that looked a little worn, his expression hard and familiar. I saw the exact moment her confidence cracked. Her mouth opened slightly, her eyes widened, and all the color drained from her face. She took one step back, clutching her bouquet like it was the only thing holding her upright. For a few seconds, no one said a word. The air felt heavy, and the only sound was the rain tapping against the tall windows. I could hear whispers starting among the guests. My son turned toward me, confusion and panic on his face. I wanted to tell him to stay calm, that this was for his own good, but I didn't have to. The truth was already walking down that aisle in the form of a man named Adrian Vega. He stopped beside me, his eyes locked on the bride. He didn't have to say anything yet. She knew who he was, and I knew exactly what was about to happen. For months, she had lied to my son, stolen from me, and built her life on a story that wasn't hers. Now, she was standing face to face with someone who had seen behind that story before. I remember taking a slow breath. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't nervous anymore. I looked at her one last time and said quietly, "You remember him, don't you, Serena?" I made sure to use her real name. That was when the murmurs started again. Louder this time, mixed with gasps and confusion. My son's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. The bride's hand trembled and the bouquet slipped from her fingers, scattering white petals across the marble floor. That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. People say weddings are supposed to be about love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. But sometimes they are about truth. Painful, inconvenient truth. That day, I didn't come to ruin my son's life. I came to save it. So, if you're wondering how a 68-year-old widow ended up crashing her only son's wedding with a man from Atlanta and a truth that broke everything apart, well, it didn't start that day. It started 6 months earlier when I met the woman my son thought he was going to marry. 6 months before that wedding day, my son Nathaniel, everyone calls him Nate, brought home a woman named Brianna Dalton, or Bree, as she liked to be called. She was young, bright, and beautiful in a way that made people look twice. She had soft blonde hair, clear eyes, and a gentle smile that could melt away tension in any room. I still remember how happy my son looked that night when he introduced her to me. His whole face lit up, the same way it used to when he was a boy showing me his good report card. I'd been worried about Nate for a long time. After his father, Robert, passed away from cancer 3 years ago, my son changed. He still worked hard, still showed up for Sunday dinners, but the spark in him was gone. Robert and Nate had been close, closer than most fathers and sons, and losing him left an empty space that I didn't know how to fill. So when Bree came along, full of warmth and laughter, I saw life come back into my boy's eyes for the first time in years. I wanted to believe that maybe this was a new beginning for both of us. Bree told us she was a pediatric nurse. She spoke softly, always using words like sweetheart and darling, which made people feel cared for. She said she loved helping children and that she'd grown up moving from town to town because of her father's work. Her story shifted a little each time she told it, but back then, I didn't notice. I was too busy being grateful that my son had finally found someone who seemed to love him. One evening after dinner, Bree and I sat together on the porch. The crickets were singing, and she looked up at the sky before saying, "Mrs. Whitmore, I know I'm not what people expect for Nate." I asked her what she meant. She said with a shaky smile, "My family doesn't approve of me marrying beneath our class. They cut me off because of it." Her eyes filled with tears, and I believed her. I told her love was worth more than money, that Robert would have said the same if he were still alive. She sniffled and took my hand. "You're like the mother I never had," she whispered. That moment I felt something break open inside me, the same ache that had been sitting in my chest since Robert died. I wanted to be that mother for her. So when she and Nate got engaged, I promised to give them the wedding they both deserved. I dipped into my savings, cashed the bonds Robert and I had kept for retirement, and even used part of his life insurance policy. Every dollar I spent felt like love, a way of keeping Robert close by doing something he would have done. I told myself that this was what families do for each other. The planning went on for months. Bree had an answer for everything: the flowers, the venue, the food. She said she wanted something timeless but simple, like real love. I remember laughing with her as we looked through catalogs, feeling more like friends than in-laws. I didn't realize then how much of her story I had already accepted without question. 2 weeks before the wedding, she came over one afternoon and said she had something important to ask. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, twisting her fingers nervously. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "would it be too much if I wore pearls on my wedding day? My grandmother always said pearls meant a blessed marriage." I smiled. "I have just the thing," I told her. I went to my bedroom and opened a small wooden box I hadn't touched since Robert's funeral. Inside was a string of white pearls, slightly yellowed with age, the Whitmore heirloom, passed down from mother to daughter-in-law for 4 generations. My husband's mother had given it to me on our wedding day, telling me it meant acceptance into the family. I held it out to Bree and said, "It's a Whitmore heirloom. It means you're family now." She gasped, her hands covering her mouth. "I can't accept this," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "It's too special." "Nonsense," I told her. "If you're marrying Nate, it's yours." She leaned forward and hugged me, sobbing into my shoulder. I cried too, overwhelmed by the thought that our family line, my husband's memory, would continue through her and my son. I remember thinking how lucky Nate was to have found someone so kind, so genuine, but looking back now, I can see how carefully everything was designed. Every tear, every story, every gentle touch, it was all part of the performance. If only I'd known then what those pearls would come to mean. They didn't bless her marriage. They exposed it. It was a Thursday evening, just a few days before the wedding. I remember because the rain had been falling since afternoon, and the streets outside Nate's apartment were shining under the streetlights. I had spent the day putting together small gift boxes for the guests, chocolates, candles, and handwritten notes that said, "Thank you for celebrating with us." I'd tied each one with a gold ribbon myself. Nate had been busy at work, and I wanted to surprise him by dropping them off at his place so he could bring them to the venue in the morning. I didn't plan to stay long, just leave the boxes by the door and drive home. But when I reached his apartment, something made me stop. The front door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, just enough to hear voices inside. At first, I thought maybe Nate had left the TV on. I stepped closer, careful not to make any noise. That's when I heard her voice. "Bree." "Adrian," she whispered sharply. "I told you not to call me on this number. Yes, the wedding is still on schedule. I'll have access to his accounts after we're married. You'll get your cut. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I'd heard wrong. Maybe it was some misunderstanding, maybe a joke. But then she said something that made my knees go weak. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's completely hooked. The old lady has already given us over 40,000. After the wedding, she'll probably help with the house down payment too. This Mark is worth at least 200,000. Mark. She called my son a Mark. I felt my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pressed myself against the wall, terrified that she'd notice the door and stop talking. I could hear her pacing in the bedroom, her voice low and impatient. Look, Adrian, don't get greedy. We agreed on 30%. Yes, after the honeymoon, we'll move fast. I'll transfer the funds, then we disappear. He won't even know what hit him. My hands were shaking. I didn't even realize I was holding the box of gift favors until I almost dropped it. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could, my chest tight, my mind spinning. Everything she had ever said to me, every tear, every story, every hug, started replaying in my head, now sounding fake, rehearsed, practiced. I thought of the pearls around her neck, of the way she looked at Nate when she thought no one was watching. It all made sense now. I walked down the hallway on unsteady legs, my breath shallow, my heart breaking with every step. By the time I reached the elevator, my face was wet, not just from the rain that had started falling harder outside, but from tears I couldn't stop. I got in my car, turned on the wipers, and just sat there. The city lights blurred through the windshield, and I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. I felt sick. I felt stupid. I had been so proud of myself for welcoming her into our lives, for believing I'd gained a daughter. And all the while she was using us. I thought about calling Nate right then, but I knew it wouldn't work. He loved her too much. He would defend her, twist it all into something innocent. He'd think I was being jealous or controlling. He'd always seen me as strong, but lately I could tell he thought I was old-fashioned, too cautious, maybe even lonely. If I told him what I heard, he'd take her side, and I'd lose him for good. So I stayed quiet. I sat there in my car with the rain pouring down and my heart breaking. I don't know how long I sat like that, but when I finally started the engine, I realized something had changed in me. The sadness was still there, but it was no longer soft. It had hardened into something else, something sharp and steady. By the time I reached home, I wasn't crying anymore. I turned on the porch light, left the wet box of wedding favors on the kitchen table, and stood by the window for a long time. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and cold. I whispered to myself, "She's not taking him. Not my son." I thought of Robert, my husband, and the way he used to face every challenge, calm but determined. He once told me, "The truth always finds its way out, Ellie. You just have to help it along sometimes." That night, I decided I would help it along. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and typed into the search bar, "Private Investigator, Savannah, Georgia." The next morning, I did what I should have done the minute I heard Bree on the phone. I went to find someone who knew how to dig. I didn't call Nate, I didn't confront her again, and I didn't let panic make me reckless. I drove into the old part of town and met Linda Monroe at a small cafe that smelled of coffee and wet wood. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, and the street outside looked like an old photograph. Linda was younger than I'd expected, but she had the kind of look that said she had seen things most people avoid. She wore a plain coat, no jewelry, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. She used to be a detective with the county. Now she ran her own private practice, mostly fraud and family disputes. I told her everything, starting from the porch gifts to the phone call I'd overheard in Nate's apartment. I left nothing out. She listened with a calm that made me steadier. When I finished, she put her cup down and said, "Exactly. What you're describing, Mrs. Whitmore, is a textbook romance scam. They fake everything, job, family, even sympathy." I asked her how she could be so sure, because part of me wanted her to be wrong. Linda explained that these people follow a pattern. They build a believable backstory, they show just enough vulnerability to trigger sympathy, and they practice the language their marks want to hear. They make small, consistent lies that add up to something convincing. They do it until the mark is invested, emotionally and financially. "How do people like that sleep at night?" I asked, more quietly than I expected. "On other people's money," she said, and there was no warmth in her voice. It was almost a fact with a period at the end. We talked logistics after that. I asked what she needed, and she explained clearly. Full names, dates, phone numbers, any documents, photographs, or social media links. She would run background checks, look for criminal records, cross-reference social security numbers, check employment histories, and use databases I had never heard of to track aliases. If there were partners involved, she could usually find them through old associates or digital traces. She said it would take time, but sometimes she could get fast results if she had a strong lead. I told her about Serena's soft voice and the pearls and how she called my son a mark. Linda didn't flinch at the word. She wrote it down. Then she asked about money. I signed a check on the spot, not because I liked spending that much, but because I wanted answers more than I wanted to save the last of Robert's paperwork untouched. I remember the ink leaving the pad and the little click of the pen, and I felt a tiny crack in my nerves that steadied me. "You sure you want to do this publicly?" Linda asked once I handed the check across the table. She meant, do we go straight to Nate with this, or do we gather everything first? I told her quietly that Nate would probably defend Bree no matter what I produced. He loved her. I wasn't willing to let drama convince him I was jealous. I wanted proof, undeniable proof, something that would make him see without thinking I'd manipulated him. Linda agreed. "We'll start quiet," she said. "I'll run records, pull camera footage if needed, and see who else is tied to this Serena Cole name. If there's a pattern, I'll find it. If there's a partner, I'll find him. You won't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." She gave me a folder with a list of what she needed and a card that had her number on it in handwriting that didn't look fancy, just practical. After she left, I sat with my coffee and the folder and tried to breathe like the world wasn't tilting. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a mother. I was a hunter. That thought surprised me with its steadiness. It felt right, not cruel. Linda called me 2 days later. Her voice on the phone was short and efficient. She had dug up a few things: a social security number that bounced between names, a registration in Miami under the name Serena Cole tied to a shell address, and a misdemeanor fraud conviction in Alabama. She said there were also old photos of a woman matching Bree's description posted on travel blogs with different names. She told me to come to her office. Her office was small and lined with files, the kind of place where people kept paper because it mattered. She laid out what she had found: copies of arrest records, screenshots of social profiles, and a spreadsheet with dates and locations. She explained that these cons usually involve partners who handled the financial side, and that sometimes a former partner might be looking for revenge or closure. That's when she mentioned a name I didn't expect: Adrian Vega, and said he had been connected to one of the earlier incidents. She had a phone number and a last known city. I didn't ask how she found that name. I didn't need to. The important thing was that the pieces were starting to line up. Linda warned me that confronting people could be dangerous, that con artists can be unpredictable when cornered. She also said she could produce an introduction to law enforcement contacts if things escalated. I thanked her and felt very small and very powerful at the same time. We agreed on a plan. Linda would keep working quietly, pull more records, and try to locate Adrian. She asked me to stay out of sight as much as possible, to let her do the digging and present the facts when she had them. I agreed, though I knew some part of me would be on edge until the wedding was over or until there was proof. On my drive home, I thought about how many women and men these people had hurt, how easily a good story could turn into a trap. I thought about Nate, about how much he deserved someone who would stand by him and not take him for granted. I thought about Robert and how he used to say that you can't stop the world from changing, but you can teach your family how to see the change coming. That afternoon, Linda called back. She had found a phone number for Adrian Vega in Atlanta and a partial record tying Serena to accounts that had been closed under suspicious circumstances. She suggested we try contacting Adrian carefully, see if he would talk. I felt my stomach drop and then tighten in a way that felt much like resolve. "Do it," I told her. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a map again. The map didn't make anything easy, but it made the direction clear. I had decided I would not wait for my son to lose everything. I would help him see the truth, even if it meant being the one who made him angry for a while. If love had led him blindfolded to this point, then truth would be the hand to guide him home. 2 weeks after our first meeting, the phone rang early in the morning. It was Linda Monroe. Her voice sounded different, firmer, heavier somehow. "Eleanor," she said, "you might want to sit down before I tell you this." I was in the kitchen halfway through my second cup of coffee. I set the mug down and sat at the table. My stomach was already tightening before she even said the words. Brianna Dalton doesn't exist. For a second, I didn't respond. The words hung in the air, quiet and unbelievable. What do you mean she doesn't exist? Her name, her background, her nursing job. All fake, Linda said. Her real name is Serena Cole. She's been arrested 3 times in the last 5 years for fraud and identity theft. Once in Florida, twice in Alabama. She's done time, but she's smart enough to keep slipping through the cracks. I stared at the window, watching the light hit the blinds, trying to make sense of it. I asked Linda if she was sure. She said she had the documents in front of her. Court records, booking photos, even fingerprints. You'll want to see this yourself, she added. An hour later, I was sitting across from her again, in that same small office filled with paper files and stale coffee smell. Linda spread out the folder on her desk. Inside were copies of mugshots, police reports, and a list of known aliases. I leaned closer, and there she was, Serena Cole, smiling for the camera like it was a yearbook photo. Same hair, same eyes, the same faint smile that used to make me think she was kind. Only this time, her eyes were colder. She's been running cons for years, Linda said, flipping through the pages. She studies her targets, their habits, their families, their weaknesses, especially widows and single parents. They're easy to read because they still believe in people. That last sentence hit harder than I expected. I looked at her photo again and thought about all the times I'd let her into my home, my kitchen, my heart. I remembered how she'd called me Mom in that trembling voice, how she'd asked for my advice about the flowers, and how I'd believed every word. My voice came out lower than I meant. Then she studied the wrong one. Linda glanced up and nodded once, her expression unreadable. She knew what I meant. She kept going, flipping to another sheet. There's more. Serena doesn't work alone. She's had partners over the years, men who help her with logistics, paperwork, or sometimes posing as family members. There's one name that keeps showing up. Adrian Vega. He was her partner about 2 years ago. They were involved romantically, from what I can tell, but she conned him too, took $15,000 from him and disappeared. The name hit me like a bell ringing. Adrian. That was the name I heard on the phone the night I stood outside Nate's apartment. He's the one she called, I said. Linda nodded. I figured as much. He's been trying to find her ever since. I tracked a few online posts he made, nothing public, but enough to show he's looking for her. She turned her computer screen toward me. There was an email draft, half-written, from an address with his name. The subject line said, "If anyone knows where Serena Cole is, contact me." He's in Atlanta now, Linda continued, working construction. Probably still trying to get his money back. He might talk if you reach out. I sat back in my chair, staring at the pile of papers. Every detail felt like a nail being hammered into a coffin. Not hers, but mine, the version of me that had trusted so easily. I thought about Robert again, about how careful he used to be with people, how he would have seen through her long before I did. I lost a husband to cancer, I said quietly, half to myself. I refused to lose my son to a parasite. Linda didn't say anything, but I could feel her approval. Not the kind of approval that came with a smile, but with respect. We spent the next hour discussing what to do. She offered to contact Adrian on my behalf, but I told her I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to hear his voice, to know what kind of man he was, to see if he was willing to help me bring her down. Just be careful, Linda warned. These situations can get messy. People like Serena, they're manipulative, but they're also desperate when they're exposed. I'll be careful, I said. I left her office with the folder under my arm, the weight of it solid and real. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. I stood by my car for a long minute, looking up at the cloudy sky, feeling the first trace of something new rising inside me. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was focus. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Serena Cole had fooled me, but she wouldn't win. Not this time. Not with my son. 2 days after Linda gave me the file, I made the call. I'd written and rewritten the number a dozen times, unsure if I should actually dial it, but that morning, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at the folder with Serena's mugshot on the cover, something in me clicked. I picked up the phone and pressed the numbers one by one. The line rang twice before a man's voice answered, low and rough. Yeah? Mr. Vega? I said. Adrian Vega? Who's asking? My name is Eleanor Whitmore, I said. You don't know me, but we have someone in common. There was a pause on the line, a shift in his breathing. What's this about Serena? I took a breath. She's marrying my son next week. Silence. Then a bitter laugh, quiet but sharp enough to sting through the receiver. You've got to be kidding me, he said. That woman, she never stops, does she? I could hear construction noise in the background. The faint echo of metal against metal, men calling out, the hum of machinery. He moved somewhere quieter, and when he spoke again, his tone had changed. Lower, controlled. What's she calling herself now? Brianna Dalton, I said. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. She always liked the names that sounded soft, made her seem harmless. I asked if he would tell me what happened between them. There was another long pause before he answered. You sure you want to hear it? He said. I need to, I told him. He exhaled slowly. Fine. Flashback, narrated by Adrian, voiceover style, stark and simple. He told me it started 3 years ago in Tampa. He was working nights at a hotel, trying to save money for a small business. Serena came in one evening, said she just had a fight with her boyfriend and needed a room for a few nights. She was beautiful, polite, and funny in that effortless way that made people want to trust her. Within a week, she was sharing his breakfast, cooking in his tiny kitchen, and talking about a future together. She said she wanted to build a life, he said quietly. I believed her. She told me I made her feel safe. I thought I was helping her get back on her feet. They'd been together 6 months when she told him she'd found a place they could rent together, but she needed him to cover the deposit until she could move her savings. He gave her everything he had, $15,000 he'd been saving for his construction license, plus his credit card. He said the last time he saw her, she kissed him goodbye in a cheap motel room lit by flickering neon. She said she was going to grab breakfast, he said, eggs and coffee. She never came back. He found out later she'd left the state that morning. The car rental company charged his card for the vehicle she'd taken. He called the police, but they told him she was already gone, probably using a new name. When he finished, there was quiet on both ends of the line. I'm sorry, I said finally. Don't be, he replied, his voice flat. I should have known better. Then, after a pause, she's marrying your son, huh? Yes, I said. Next Saturday. He let out a low whistle. She moves fast. I need your help, I said carefully. Not for me, for my son. He's completely blind to who she is. What do you want me to do? I want her to see you again, I said. In public. There was silence for a few seconds, then a quiet, disbelieving laugh. You want me to crash her wedding? I want her exposed, I said. She's built this whole life on lies. It should end the way it began, in front of everyone she fooled. He didn't answer right away. I could hear him breathing, thinking. Then he said, You know, I've imagined running into her again 100 times. Sometimes I thought I'd yell. Sometimes I thought I'd just walk away. He paused. But this sounds better. Then you'll help? There was a short, dry laugh. Tell me where and when. I gave him the date, time, and place. The Bellamy estate, grand, old, and expensive. He repeated the name, almost amused by it. Figures, he muttered. She always had a taste for places that didn't belong to her. Before we hung up, I asked him why he was willing to do this for someone he didn't know. Because, he said simply, no one should get away with what she does. And because I never got my breakfast. I couldn't help but smile at that. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about balance, about truth catching up to a lie. The next morning, I got the news that I was officially off the guest list. The message came from Nate, short and awkward. Mom, I think it's better if you don't come to the ceremony. Bree feels like your presence might make things tense. Please understand. I read the message twice, then set the phone down. After everything I'd done, after every check I'd written, she had convinced him to uninvite his own mother. I stared out the kitchen window for a while, then caught my reflection in the glass, tired eyes, calm expression, and I heard myself say softly, Perfect. If I wasn't invited, then I didn't have to play nice anymore. I picked up the folder Linda had given me, flipped through the pages, and smiled faintly at Serena's mugshot. Let's make this memorable, I said to the empty room. I started with the venue. The Ashford Manor coordinator, Mrs. Monroe, sounded chipper when she picked up. "Mrs. Whitmore, how lovely to hear from you. We're so excited about the big day." "So am I said, sweet as sugar. "Actually, I'm calling because there's been a small change. The bride's family has decided to handle all the final payments." "Oh, that's wonderful news," she said. "Reconciliation is always such a blessing." "Yes," I said. "Isn't it wonderful when families reunite?" I gave her the fake phone number Linda had confirmed was one of Serena's backup numbers, a prepaid cell registered under another alias. "They'll be in touch today," I added cheerfully. By the time we hung up, she was practically glowing with happiness. The next call was the florist. They'd ordered over 2,000 white roses imported from Ecuador. I told them the same thing, that the bride's family would take over payment and that they should contact them directly. The woman on the other end thanked me for the update and said how nice it was that everyone was coming together for the wedding. I said, "Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it?" and smiled at the irony. Next came the caterer, then the photographer, the band, and finally the wedding planner herself. With each call, my voice got steadier, smoother. I used the same tone every time, calm, polite, professional. I even laughed once or twice, pretending to be a relieved mother of the groom, happy that the bride's family had finally decided to do their part. By noon, every vendor involved in that wedding had the same instruction: stop billing my account and direct all questions to the Millers, Serena's non-existent family, and every single one of them now had her fake number. That afternoon, I sat at my desk going through the wedding invoices one by one, canceling payments, flagging transactions, and freezing charges. Watching the totals disappear from my banking app was strangely satisfying. For the first time in months, I felt in control. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about taking back the power she thought she had over me. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Serena, or rather Brianna, was at her final dress fitting. The bridal boutique was quiet except for the sound of silk against fabric and the hum of the sewing machine. She stood in front of the mirror, twirling slowly in that white gown that had cost more than some people's cars. Her phone started to buzz on the counter, once, twice, then again. Unknown number, then another, then another. She frowned, glanced at the screen, and silenced it. Then she turned back to the mirror, admiring herself. Back in my house, I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the computer screen as I checked the cancellations again. Every payment line that used to say "processed now" read "on hold." The sound of rain tapped softly against the window, steady and calm. I took a slow breath and let it out. It wasn't anger that I felt anymore. It was quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when you finally stop playing defense. I poured myself a small glass of wine and whispered, "Sleep well, Serena. You'll need your rest." Later that night, Nate called. "Mom, something weird's going on," he said. "The venue and florist keep calling Bree, about payments. She says she doesn't know what's happening." I kept my voice gentle. "Oh, that does sound strange. Maybe a mix-up in their system." "She's really upset," he said. "She thinks someone's trying to sabotage the wedding." "Sabotage?" I repeated softly. "That's a strong word, honey." "I know. I wanted to check with you." "Sweetheart," I said, the way I used to when he scraped his knees as a boy, "don't worry about it. These things happen. The important thing is that you're marrying the woman you love." There was a pause on his end. "Yeah, right." "Get some sleep," I said. "You've got a big day ahead." When I hung up, I sat very still. The guilt crept in for a moment, just a flicker, then passed. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't cruelty. This was protection. The night before the wedding, I didn't expect to hear from her. I'd spent the evening in my living room, half-packed suitcase by the door, just in case Nate called and demanded to know where I was. I had no intention of going anywhere, but I wanted him to believe I had. The house was quiet except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock over the mantel. Then my phone rang. Unknown number? I didn't have to look twice. I knew that voice the moment I picked up. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began, syrup sweet as always. "It's Bree. I just wanted to thank you for being so understanding about tomorrow." I let her speak. There was something almost rehearsed about the tone, the same polite softness she'd used when asking me for money, when pretending to care about my stories of Robert. I could almost see her standing there, in some expensive hotel suite surrounded by silk and perfume, smiling at herself in the mirror. "Of course, dear," I said, steady and kind. "Every bride deserves peace on her wedding day." She gave a little laugh. Light, practiced. That's very gracious of you. Andrew told me you're going to Savannah for the weekend. Antiquing, right? Yes, I said, smiling into the phone. Just a little trip to clear my head. There was a pause. Maybe she expected me to sound jealous, maybe nervous. But all she got was calm. I hope you have a wonderful time, she said finally. And Mrs. Whitmore? She hesitated, softening her tone even more. After the wedding, maybe we could have lunch. I'd really like for us to be friends. The gall of her nearly made me laugh out loud. That sounds lovely, I said instead. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. She exhaled, satisfied. Good night then, Mrs. Whitmore. Good night, dear, I said and hung up. For a long moment, I just stared at the phone in my hand. The room felt still, heavy in that way it does before a storm breaks. Then I stood, went to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of white wine. I took it to the window. Outside, the night was dark and clean after the earlier rain. The streetlights glowed across the wet pavement, soft and gold. In the glass reflection, I could see myself. Older, yes. Lines deeper than they used to be, but steady. Whole. To family, I said softly, raising the glass toward my reflection, and the peace that comes after war. I drank slowly, the wine crisp and cold. I thought about Nate, about the little boy who used to leave me notes under my pillow when he was scared of thunderstorms, about how much he looked like Robert when he smiled. My son, who had trusted the wrong woman because he'd never known what deception looked like. Because I had shielded him too well from people like her. I'd spent weeks replaying every memory of Serena, how she'd flinched when I mentioned background checks for the vendors, how she'd once called a florist honey, then snapped when the woman didn't respond fast enough. It was all there now, plain as day. The tells I should have seen sooner. I used to think grief made me soft. I learned it just made me quiet. There's a difference. Somewhere across town, Serena was probably standing in front of her mirror, wearing my pearls, thinking she'd won. She had no idea what was waiting for her in the morning. The phone buzzed again, a text from Nate. Love you, Mom. Wish you were here. Bree's nervous but happy. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart hurt in that dull, deep way that comes from loving someone you can't protect without hurting them first. I love you too, sweetheart. I typed back. You'll understand everything soon. Then I put the phone face down. Later, as I was washing the empty wine glass, I caught myself smiling. Not a happy smile, not even satisfied. It was the kind of smile that comes when you finally stop running from the truth. Tomorrow wasn't just her wedding day. It was the end of a story I hadn't meant to start, but was determined to finish. I turned off the lights, leaving the kitchen in darkness, and stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Then I whispered to the empty house, Sleep well, Serena. You'll need your strength. The morning of the wedding came gray and wet. The kind of rain that doesn't pour but lingers, soft, steady, and impossible to ignore. I woke before sunrise. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't need to. My hands were calm, my mind sharper than it had been in months. I opened my closet and pulled out a simple black dress, the same one I wore to Robert's funeral, and then slowly I reached for my pearls, the ones Serena had worn around her neck just days before. They felt cold against my skin. I stood in front of the mirror for a long moment, tying my hair back and studying the face staring back at me. The wrinkles were deeper now, but my eyes looked steady. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore, not the naive mother who'd been fooled. Today, I was something else entirely. By noon, the drizzle had turned to mist. I parked 2 blocks away from Ashford Manor and walked the rest of the distance with my umbrella low, the smell of wet roses in the air. The estate looked like a postcard. Tall columns, marble steps, manicured gardens, the kind of place built for fairy tales. Inside, I could already hear the faint sound of a piano playing. The ceremony was starting. I slipped in through the side entrance near the catering hall, where staff hurried back and forth carrying trays and floral arrangements. No one looked twice at me. Everyone was too busy dealing with payments that hadn't come through, too distracted by chaos to notice one more woman in black. The grand chapel smelled of white roses and candle wax. The marble floor gleamed under the light streaming through tall stained glass windows. I found a shadowed spot near the back, behind a pillar, close enough to see, far enough to stay unseen. The guests whispered and shuffled in their seats. The string quartet played the opening notes of the bridal march. My heart beat slow and steady. Then she appeared. Serena Cole, though everyone here knew her as Brianna Dalton, walked down the aisle with the grace of a queen. Her dress shimmered under the lights, the fabric hugging her figure like it was made for her. And around her neck, gleaming against her skin, were my pearls. The guests sighed at how beautiful she looked. My son, standing at the altar, smiled like a man who thought he'd found heaven. If only he knew. As she took another step forward, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the message I had already typed to Adrian. Just one word. Now. I hit send. For a moment, nothing happened. The music swelled, the air thick with perfume and quiet awe. Then, the back doors burst open. Every head turned. Adrian Vega walked down the aisle like a man walking toward judgment. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, rain still clinging to his hair. He didn't care. His eyes locked on Serena. "Serena Cole?" His voice echoed off the marble walls. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" The room froze. The pianist stopped, playing. For a moment, nobody breathed. Serena's bouquet slipped from her hands, falling to the floor with a dull thud. White roses scattered across the marble, their petals damp and fragile. Slow motion, the flowers falling, the gasps from the crowd, the sound of whispers spreading like wind. My son turned, confusion etched across his face. "Who is that?" he asked. Adrian didn't answer him. He took another step forward. "You remember me, don't you, Serena? Or do you go by Brianna now? Maybe Jessica, like last time?" A murmur rippled through the guests. Heads swiveled from the bride to the man in the aisle. Serena's face went pale. "I don't know you," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, you're mistaken." Adrian let out a short, humorless laugh. "Mistaken? You conned me 3 years ago in Tampa, stole $15,000 and disappeared before breakfast." Her mouth opened, then closed again. Nate stepped between them, confused and protective. "Sir, I think you've made a mistake. This is my fiancée." Adrian shook his head slowly. "Your fiancée? She's a professional con artist. Ask her real name. Ask her what she did to me, or to the last man she tricked." The whispers turned into full-on chatter. Someone near the front gasped. Someone else pulled out their phone to record. Serena tried to hold on to her composure, her voice shaking but still sweet. "Andrew, he's lying. He's some jealous ex trying to ruin our day." But the cracks were showing. Her perfect mask was breaking. Adrian pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a copy of her mugshot, printed straight from Linda's file. He held it up high. "This is Serena Cole, arrested 3 times for fraud, same eyes, same smile, same lies." The guests leaned in to see. I saw Nate's face change, the shock, the disbelief, then the fear. "Bree?" he whispered. She took a step back. "It's not what it looks like," she said, but her voice had lost its charm. Adrian's voice cut through hers. "You said you'd changed, remember? You said you were done running. But here you are again. Same act, different target." Serena turned to the crowd, desperate. "He's crazy. I don't even know this man." But Adrian didn't flinch. He turned his gaze toward me, just for a second, a small nod, our signal that everything was in motion. Then he said it, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ask her about the money. Ask her who paid for this wedding. Ask her about the pearls she's wearing." Serena froze. I stepped out from behind the pillar. For a moment, time stopped. She saw me. Recognition flashed across her face. Shock, anger, then fear. Our eyes met. "You," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "Hello, dear." The crowd erupted into whispers again. The minister backed away from the altar. My son looked between us, his world falling apart right there in front of him. I stood, taller, adjusting the pearls around my neck. "I told you every bride deserves peace," I said softly. "I just didn't say when." Slow motion, the white petals scattered across the marble, voices overlapping, the low hum of panic spreading. The truth was out. The performance was over. And as I watched her crumble beneath the weight of her own lies, I felt nothing but stillness, not triumph, not rage, just peace. The chapel was silent except for the rain tapping against the tall stained glass windows. Everyone watched as Adrian stepped closer to the altar, the folder in his hand thick with proof. His voice was calm but sharp, the voice of a man who had waited a long time for this moment. He opened the folder and spread the papers out on the nearest pew. "You want proof?" he said. "Here it is. Serena Cole, also known as Brianna Dalton, Arrested in Miami, Birmingham, and Memphis. Fraud, fraud, fraud. The photos fluttered across the marble floor like cards thrown by a magician. Each one showed her smiling that same sweet smile, the one she'd used to fool every single person in this room. "She's lying," Serena shouted. Her voice cracked high and panicked. "None of that's me. This is harassment." Adrian didn't even look at her. He took out his phone, tapped the screen, and let the recording play through the chapel's echoing silence. The old widow's so desperate for grandkids she'll pay for anything. A pause, followed by laughter. Her son's a total mama's boy. He'll do whatever she says. This one's easy money. The words came out clear, unmistakable, her voice smug and cruel. Gasps filled the room, whispers rippled through the crowd. I could see faces turning toward me, pity mixed with disbelief. My son just stood there, frozen. His hands dropped to his sides, his expression hollow. "You," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, "You called my mother a widow? A mark?" Serena took a shaky step toward him. Her voice softened instantly, sugar-coating every word. "Nate, baby, listen to me. That recording, it's not what it sounds like. People change, and I changed because of you." It was the same tone she'd used when she first met me, pretending to be shy and sincere. It might have worked once, but not anymore. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Even snakes can shed their skin," I said quietly. "They're still snakes." Serena's head snapped toward me, eyes wild. "You did this," she hissed. You set me up." I didn't flinch. "You did this to yourself." Nate looked between us, searching for something, a reason to still believe her, but the look in his eyes told me the truth had finally landed. He saw it. All of it. He bent down, picked up one of the photos Adrian had dropped, and stared at it for a long moment. Then he turned it toward her. "Is this you?" She hesitated, just long enough. "That's not—" He cut her off. "Stop lying." His voice broke on the second word. "Stop." The guests stayed quiet now, their phones forgotten in their hands. The pianist had stood up, the minister frozen near the altar. No one dared move. Serena's face crumbled. "Please, Nate," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. It started as a mistake. I was desperate. But then I fell in love with you. I swear." He looked at her with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Not anger, not hatred, just exhaustion. "You don't even know what love is." Adrian put his phone away and crossed his arms. "You done?" he asked her flatly. "Because there's one more person who'd like to have a word." He nodded toward the back of the chapel, and that's when two men in dark suits appeared at the door. Federal agents. Serena froze. "You called the police?" Adrian smirked. "No, lady. The FBI, they've been watching your online account since last week." One of the agents stepped forward. "Serena Cole, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and wire deception." The guests gasped again as they pulled her hands behind her back and read her rights. Serena tried to twist free, her voice breaking into screams. "This is a mistake. You can't do this here, not today." But it was too late. They walked her down the aisle she'd dreamed of, the aisle she thought would make her respectable, loved, untouchable. The pearls around her neck gleamed under the chapel lights as she turned, glaring at me. "This isn't over, old woman," she spat. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Nate watched her go, his face pale, his hands clenched. When the doors closed behind her, the room stayed silent for what felt like a full minute. Then softly, the pianist whispered, "Should I play something?" No one answered. I took a small step toward my son. "Nate." He turned to me, his eyes wet. "How long did you know?" "Long enough," I said, "but I needed you to see it for yourself." He nodded slowly and then let out a shaky breath that sounded like a sob. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I reached for his hand. "Don't be. You were in love. That's all." He looked at me, searching my face. "I should have listened to you." I smiled faintly. "You did, eventually." Behind us, the guests started whispering again, phones clicking, the first stories of the wedding scandal already making their way online. But I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was standing there, next to my son, as the truth finally came into the light. The air in the chapel was heavy, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. Every pair of eyes followed Serena as she turned, her white dress trembling with each breath, her face twisted, raw with fury. She pointed straight at me. "You did this," she screamed. "You couldn't stand losing him. You've been jealous from the start." Her voice echoed through the hall, sharp and cracking. A few guests flinched. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." I took one slow step forward, heels clicking against the marble floor. My pearls caught the light as I stopped in the center aisle. "You're right," I said quietly. My voice carried easily in the still air. "I couldn't stand losing him to someone who never loved him." You could have heard a pin drop. Serena's mouth opened like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Her hands shook as she looked around, searching for someone, anyone, to take her side. But there was no one left. The lies had run out of oxygen. Then came the sound that ended it all, the steady, rhythmic thud of shoes on marble. Two men in dark suits stepped through the open doors, badges raised. The taller one spoke first, his voice even. "Serena Cole, you're under arrest for fraud and identity theft." The words hung in the air like a church bell. Serena backed away instinctively, shaking her head. "No, you can't do this here. This is my wedding." But the agents didn't hesitate. One reached for her arm. The other read her rights in a calm monotone. Her shouts grew louder, desperate. "You can't arrest me in front of everyone. This is harassment. I didn't do anything wrong." The agent snapped the cuffs around her wrists, the sharp click cutting through her protests. The sight was almost surreal. A bride in white lace, pearls glinting under the stained glass, the silver cuffs shining against her bouquet. Someone in the pew whispered, "Is this real?" Another guest lifted their phone, already recording. The faint sound of a video notification chimed somewhere in the crowd. The scene moved in slow motion, the white train dragging across the marble, her heels slipping on rose petals, the murmurs of 100 guests capturing history through their screens. Outside, through the rain-streaked windows, flashes of blue light reflected, patrol cars waiting at the gate. Serena twisted to look back at me as the agents led her away. Her voice cracked, half rage, half disbelief. "You'll regret this. Both of you will." I didn't answer. I just stood still and watched the door close behind her. Then came the whispers, spreading like wildfire. "Did you get that on video?" She scammed the groom's mother. "What's the hashtag?" By the time I turned back toward the altar, half the room was already typing on their phones. Within hours, I knew it would be everywhere. Wedding con artist, trending across the internet. I didn't care about that. Not really. All I saw was my son, standing near the altar, his tuxedo wrinkled, his hands still trembling. He looked lost, like a man waking from a nightmare. I walked toward him slowly. "It's over," I said softly. He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the empty space where she'd been. "I thought I knew her," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That's what makes people like her dangerous. They make you believe you're safe." He finally looked at me, tears in his eyes. "How did you know?" "I listened," I said simply, "to what didn't make sense, to what didn't feel right." For a moment we just stood there together, the mother and the son, surrounded by fallen petals and silent guests. The music had stopped, but the echoes of what had happened still filled the room. Then the pianist, uncertain, began to play again. Soft, hesitant notes that floated up toward the stained glass above us. I turned to face the altar one last time. The candles flickered in the draft, the white flowers already beginning to wilt. Somewhere in me, something loosened. Not joy, not triumph, just release. Justice, I thought, doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it shows up right where the lies were born. The chapel looked nothing like it had an hour ago. The flowers were crushed underfoot, the petals scattered like confetti after a storm. Guests stood frozen, still processing what they'd just witnessed. Some whispered softly, others stared down at their phones, already scrolling through the first headlines. Nate was still at the altar, his face pale but composed. He took a slow breath, then exhaled, almost like he was forcing himself back to life. Finally, he looked up and said, "Well, this is awkward." A small, uneasy laugh rippled through the crowd. He straightened his jacket, forcing a smile. "Reception's paid for. There's an open bar, everyone." The guests hesitated, and then one by one began to move. A few chuckled nervously, some offered quiet words of sympathy as they filed toward the ballroom. No one quite knew how to behave at a wedding that had just turned into a crime scene. I stayed by the door, still holding my purse, watching my son try to salvage what was left of his dignity. My throat ached, but I couldn't cry. Not properly. Tears came slowly without sound, blurring the sight of him standing there in his tuxedo, trying so hard to be calm. He caught my eye and gave a small nod as if to say, "Wait for me." Then he turned to the minister, shook his hand, and began walking down the aisle toward me. The sound of his shoes echoed through the empty pews. When he reached me, he stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He just looked at me. Not angry, not ashamed, just tired. Then, without a word, he reached up and unclasped the pearl necklace from around his neck. The same necklace Serena had worn minutes earlier. His hands shook slightly as he placed it in my palm. "These belong to you," he said quietly. The pearls were warm from his skin. I stared at them for a long moment before closing my hand over them. "No," I said softly. "They belong to the woman my son truly marries someday." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, "for not listening, for believing her instead of you." I smiled faintly, even as my voice trembled. "You don't have to apologize. You were in love. That's nothing to be sorry for." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You tried to warn me." "I did," I said, "but you had to see it for yourself." He let out a shaky laugh, wiping at his face. "You always were stubborn." "Runs in the family," I said. We both smiled, just barely. For the first time in months, it felt like we could breathe again. The sound of distant music drifted in from the reception hall. The band had started playing, maybe out of habit, maybe out of mercy. A few guests were laughing now, clinking glasses, trying to make something good out of the wreckage. "Come on," I said, touching his arm. "Let's face the music." He hesitated. "You really want to go in there?" "I didn't dress up for nothing," I said, half smiling. "And besides, if there's an open bar, I'd say we've earned it." That got a real laugh out of him. Soft, tired, but real. He offered me his arm, and together we walked down the aisle that had just seen the worst and best of both of us. The ballroom was half full, the atmosphere strange, but not entirely bleak. The flowers were still beautiful, the lights still warm. People spoke in hushed tones, but there was laughter too, the kind that comes after shock, when everyone's trying to remember what normal feels like. We made our way to the back, where the buffet table stood untouched. I poured 2 glasses of champagne. Nate raised his in a small toast. "To family," he said quietly. I met his glass with mine. "To truth," I answered. We drank in silence for a while, just watching the guests move around us. Every now and then, someone approached to offer a hug or an awkward compliment. "You were brave, Mrs. Whitmore?" Or, "What a story." I smiled politely, but my thoughts were somewhere else. I kept looking at my son, the way he carried himself. Still hurt, still reeling, but standing tall. And I realized that maybe this wasn't the ending I'd imagined for him, but it was a beginning all the same. After a moment, he looked at me. "Do you think I'll ever trust anyone again?" "Yes," I said, "but not right away. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight." He nodded. "I guess you're right." "I usually am," I said, and he laughed again, a sound I hadn't heard in too long. The music changed to something slower, softer. Couples began to dance, their movements gentle and careful. I turned toward the window, watching the rain outside blur the lights of Ashford Manor. For the first time since all of this began, I let myself exhale. The reception that wasn't a wedding turned out to be one of the most honest parties I'd ever attended. The band played softly, the air smelled of champagne and damp roses, and people spoke in careful tones, half sympathy, half fascination. Everywhere I looked, someone was whispering. Guests at each table leaned in close, phones glowing under the warm light. By the time dessert was served, the story had already spread beyond Ashford Manor. Savannah Scam Wedding? That's what they were calling it online? I didn't care about the headlines or the laughter. I found a quiet table by the window and poured myself a cup of tea. The flowers on the table were already wilting, their petals curling in the candlelight. It felt fitting. For the first time in months, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't angry, just still. The seat across from me creaked, and I looked up to see Adrian Vega. He was out of his jacket now, sleeves rolled up, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "You gave me my closure, Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly. I smiled. "And you gave me my courage." He looked down at his cup of coffee, shaking his head with a faint grin. "Never thought I'd see her face again. Never thought I'd get to say what I needed to say." "You did more than that," I said. "You helped a mother save her son." He let out a breath long and heavy, the kind of breath that only comes after years of carrying something. Guess that makes us even. I nodded. Maybe. But if you ever start a detective agency, you've got your first client. That made him laugh. A real, full laugh that broke through the quiet hum of the room. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Whitmore, he said, finally standing. You too, Adrian. When he left, I sat alone again, my tea long gone cold. The soft murmur of the guests blended with the sound of the rain still falling outside. Across the room, I saw Nate standing near the bar, talking to an older couple who'd been friends of my late husband. He looked tired but lighter, his smile uncertain but genuine. After a moment, he caught my eye and walked over, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He raised his glass. To my mother, the woman who saved my life. I froze for a second, then smiled as the guests around us clapped. Some even cheered softly. To my son, I replied, lifting my glass in return. The man who finally learned to see. We drank together. The warmth from the champagne spread slowly through me, settling somewhere deep in my chest. The music shifted to a soft jazz tune. Couples began to dance again, careful not to step on the fallen petals still scattered across the floor. Nate was pulled into conversation by a friend. I stayed by the window watching. The night light outside glowed golden against the rain, and for the first time in a long time I felt something like peace. Justice had come, not the loud, triumphant kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that simply restores balance, the kind that lets you breathe again. I thought of Robert, my late husband. Of the pearls now tucked safely in my purse, of the lies that had almost broken us, and the truth that had set us free. Sometimes people think strength means shouting louder, fighting harder. But I'd learned something different. Strength, I realized, is calm. It's knowing when to stop crying and start acting. It's learning to sharpen your edges when the world tries to dull them. I turned toward the ballroom one last time, taking in the soft laughter, the clinking glasses, the people who had stayed even after the storm. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. It was late that night. The house was still, the air warm and thick with the sound of crickets outside. Nate and I sat on the porch, just the 2 of us, the soft yellow light from the kitchen spilling across the wooden steps. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't need to. The kind of silence that follows a storm isn't empty. It's heavy but peaceful, the kind that says we made it through. Nate leaned back in his chair, staring into the dark yard. You ever regret it? He asked quietly. I turned toward him. Regret what? He looked at me, his eyes tired but softer than I'd seen in years. Being the villain in someone's story. I thought about that for a long time. The word villain lingered in the air between us, fragile but honest. Finally, I said, only when the villain's wrong. He laughed softly, that same half-smile he used to give when he was a boy, and I'd caught him lying about something small. Guess you weren't wrong this time. I smiled back. No, just stubborn. He wiped a hand over his face, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. You know, he said, Dad would have been proud. That one hit deep. I felt the sting behind my eyes before I could stop it. I looked up at the sky, dark, scattered with stars just starting to peek through the clouds. He always believed truth finds its way, I said quietly, even through heartbreak. Nate didn't say anything for a while, then, almost in a whisper, I think I understand that now. We sat there in silence again, the crickets singing somewhere beyond the garden. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the air clean and new. The night smelled like wet earth and jasmine. For the first time since Robert's death, maybe even before that, I felt peace settle into my bones. Not happiness exactly, but something steadier, something that could last. Inside, the clock chimed midnight. Nate stood, stretched, and smiled down at me. Get some sleep, Mom, he said gently. Tomorrow's a new start. I nodded. It is. When he went inside, I stayed for a moment longer, listening to the night. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I looked down at my hands. The pearls were still there, warm from being held too long. I turned them over slowly, watching the light catch on their smooth surface. So many memories lived in those pearls, generations of love, trust, and heartbreak. Then, quietly, I stood and walked inside. The house smelled like old wood and lavender, the scent of home. I went to my dresser and opened the small wooden box I'd kept for years, the one Robert had given me when we first married. I placed the pearls inside, gently coiling them like something sacred. Then I closed the lid. They would wait, for someone worthy. I lingered there a moment longer, fingertips resting on the box before turning off the lamp.